Hi friends, my name is host Eric, and today I'm going to make a video about social media, toxicity, and the end of civilization. Or in other words, I'm going to make a video about Karma's Pimp's comment here. And before I go any further, let me just say, I believe based purely on this comment, that he's probably an INFJ. I don't know his type. He may or may not have told me, I don't remember if he did. And I have heretofore operated with him, or talked to him and whatever, under the basic assumption that since I haven't typed him, he's typeless to me, This comment suggests strongly of INFJ, though. So let's look at it. All social media really does increase our depression. It does not matter our personality type. So, right off the bat, we've got a nice NI inclusiveness here. Listen, this is a universal rule that applies to everybody no matter what. I don't agree with this claim, but it's easy to see how a knower could believe that about social media. That it's depressing because it's so much, you're at such a deficit with knowledge. In other words, when I take action, it's uncertain, it's risky, it's hit and miss. Knowledge doesn't tend to be that way. So putting yourself out there means getting misses that you could avoid by not putting yourself out there. For an INFJ, they're going to have a very love-hate relationship with social media as a consequence. He says next, we are on it just to share our views. We connect with those who mostly just share our views. We get thumbs up almost entirely by those who share our views. Nothing visceral about it. I mean, the thing is, I make videos that express positions on cognitive functions or politics or social media or whatever, but I also make a lot of videos that are non-advocacies, songs, little comedy things or whatever, and that's not really about sharing views, Like, in other words, it's not about sharing my positions. You could disagree with me on everything and potentially still like one of my songs. You might say, well, liking your song then is that person's view. They share your view. Well, I mean, I don't understand what's wrong with people connecting with like-minded people. People do not actually read, listen, or take an interest in what anyone says and will like whatever comments criticizing you that are irrelevant to everything you said. Well, some people will. I think what Carmen Smith may be experiencing in the moment when he's writing this comment is what I would call an NI-DOM's frustration to instrumental NI. It is true that people with NI in a tool slot, with the somewhat exceptions of ENFJs, will conceive of personality type and cognitive functions as being less definitive than they are, because they'll see it as part of a process of self-growth rather than an independent status that you firmly determine and leave alone thereafter. He next says people take like reacts as some sort of confirmation, despite them being so far removed from any actual consensus. So I would note here again, note the total NI frame. I don't take people liking my videos with likes as indicative of anything other than that video was more likable or less likable than most of my other videos, depending on how well it does. Clearly, the likes are correctly indicative, at least some of the time, of how much people like your video or your song or whatever. So it's like I put up the Stabbing Everybody song the other night and was shocked because I never get that kind of action on a song or that ratio of likes. But it was because it was a better video. So in other words, it's like from the perspective of that's something somebody might want to consume. It was 40 seconds long or something, and it had some Had plenty of stuff going on visually, plenty of stuff going on audioly. It didn't overstay its welcome. There's a lot of things it did well to accomplish that. So I would disagree that it doesn't indicate some sort of confirmation. I will agree, however, that a lack of likes doesn't necessarily indicate that there's something wrong with something, or that even it doesn't deserve likes, or that it's not good. But it probably is indicative of there being some kind of presentation or displaying issue that's interfering with people appreciating what you might recognize as really good, but others don't seem to. I don't tend to trust my own judgment about my own stuff. I trust other people's judgment more, the external worlds. However, that's in the short term. There are some songs that I've made that have gotten zero positive feedback, but many years later, I'm still convinced that it's a great song. Or have become convinced. Not still convinced, right? As I make it, I record it, whatever, it gets no response, I assume it's terrible. Maybe I re-experience it at some point and start coming to my own intuitive conclusions about it, and I may end up disagreeing with everybody. And of course, if I do, I think I'm right and everybody else is wrong. Something that I'm more certain about than others regarding that. So NI aesthetics and stuff is not a area where I am quite as likely to express certainty regarding my own work, for sure. On the other hand, if you play me a song, say, I want you to listen to this song and tell me what you think about it, or if you think it's good or bad, or why, I have a very strong opinion and believe myself to be completely exactly correct about it, and deviation from my opinion being wrong. Now, aesthetics obviously can't be established definitively the way that right and wrong with TI logic can, so it's not worth arguing over, but I nevertheless believe in absolutist aesthetics. And it's funny, I think we all do. If you ask somebody, is it an objective fact whether something's good or bad art, or is it subjective? Almost everybody will say subjective. It's eye of the beholder. It's just beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It's an arbitrary thing. But what about this? What if you ask them, how about a catchy song? Is catchiness just in the eye of the beholder? So is it possible for somebody to be wrong when they say a song is catchy? Ooh, that song's so catchy. But it's really something, some turgid death metal thing or whatever that doesn't have any melodic pop to it at all. I think most people would say that, okay, we know basically what we mean when we say catchy, and that's definitely not catchy. We could at least eliminate certain things from the possibility of being considered catchy and have that determination at least be called objective, right? Yes, consensus does not necessarily mean anything. It doesn't mean everything, but it does mean something. The thing about consensus is, consensus is a hard standard to meet. You want to come by here?
I'll come.
Oh, okay, cool. In some sense, what I think the word we maybe would be better off focusing on is agreement. So we try to get, yes, consensus does not necessarily say anything, but reacts are even less than that. If you only care about what's being said globally. So in other words, you're sort of saying likes or reacts aren't worth anything because they only represent the relationship of people who are already either on the same wavelength as you or an opposing wavelength. So there's no meaningful room to grow communicatively as people via communication or something. But also that's from somebody who's probably a knower. So if you're a Karma's Pimp and you feel like you know very clearly what the actual status of something is, then, like whether a video is good or not, then you're not going to need to reference likes or anything. But I genuinely don't know whether my videos are good when I make them. I can't tell until later. I have to watch them a few times. I'm an SI type. My NI is ignoring. And I don't trust it very much when I have to use it consciously like that. So let's look here. We try to get attention from these complete strangers. Okay, I try to get attention from people, in general. whether or not they're strangers seems a strange distinction to me. I mean, presumably you're not a stranger if I've met you before. So it's like, instead of strangers, there are people I might have the opportunity to meet someday. I don't know. We find some random idiots who have nothing in common with us merely because they're pretentious, and we are desperately seeking to approval from them due to our own insecurities. Okay, well, I'm not insecure about the stuff that one might remedy insecurities via engagement with pretentious people. And I find that the things I am insecure about, maybe like whether or not I'm SE tough, or whether or not I'm studly enough, or stuff like that I might be insecure about because it's my 8th slot function, or insecure about my 6th slot function, whether or not I'm being smart and efficient in how I'm doing things. But you'll note I don't watch videos of people who've got good TE or good SE in order to try to treat my own insecurities. I may have strategies for treating them, but it doesn't involve consuming media. As much as social media helps us connect, it has also made us more disconnected. Not me. And we appear to be way more alienated than we ever have been before. Not me. I'm way less alienated and way more connected than I was prior to YouTube. That's not my experience. Now, again, I think basically we could resolve a lot of these disputes here by just getting rid of that sentence at the top that says, does not matter our personality type. I think it does matter a lot. For me, what I discovered once I became a YouTuber was that prior to being a YouTuber, I felt very alienated and lonely and didn't know it. And that after YouTube, I feel like I finally got enough basic material that I needed in me in some regard to function healthily, that I was starved for engagement. Now, granted, as an ENTP with FI polar, I close the distance quickly, and I engage within a certain amount of emotional openness with somebody right away, kind of big eye, and get a quick connection. But then it's unwise for them to read much into that, because just because I like you a lot and had a great time talking to you doesn't mean I necessarily want to talk to you again. It's like when you talk to so many people as I do, it's the line between like friend and something else, it becomes very blurry, Once again, this is just our quality guarantee for you. This is how you know it's an authentic Talking to Friends People video. If you don't hear Rachel coughing in the background, it might be counterfeit. As much as it made me more alienated than before, social media isn't the problem, though. It is how we process it that makes it problematic. We, in general, are overly intellectualizing relationships and friendships, while overly emotionalizing politics and ethics, playing up our intellectualism. I agree that it's like I wouldn't even necessarily say we're over emotionalizing politics and ethics. I think instead, there's been an unfortunate broad acceptance of basic utilitarian concepts that are wicked, like the ends justify the means. It used to be when I was a kid that you couldn't make those arguments without being called on them in the public sphere. But now it's commonplace. As far as intellectualizing relationships and friendships, I suspect that's only done by meta-analysts, really. And probably INFJs and ENTPs are some of the two types that intellectualize their relationships more than anybody. Rachel and I, our relationship is characterized by a powerful contraindication of harm doing rather than a powerful indication of doing good. So we don't expect each other to do much for each other or provide much benefit to each other, or also we don't expect the other person to put aside what they're doing or what they want to do. It's like we're not selfish like that. Neither of us is. She's countervalued FI and I'm third slot. So that means we have a great relationship by not ever crossing each other's boundaries, and sometimes we scramble comedically in these desperate dances of boundary crossing avoidance that are totally unnecessary. Are we over intellectualizing it? We are an INFP, an INFJ, and an ENTP. So we are doing mapping stuff all the time about our relationship and everything else because we're mapping types. And we ultimately understand the world best when we have a good model to start with rather than starting with reality and building from there. Even if you're an SI user like me, if I'm going to learn Spanish, for example, I want the Spanish teacher to teach me all the grammar and all the verb conjugations first, and then I'll just plug in the vocabulary once I understand how to convey what I want to convey, and I only need the words to plug in. So that would be an example of perhaps over-intellectualizing Spanish, except it's not over-intellectualizing it, it's being an ENTP approaching a curriculum through an ENTP's lens. This last bit, playing up our intellectualism. Who is playing up their intellectualism? I see a remarkable dearth of it, frankly. I wish that politicians would display more, at least gestures of loyalty towards intellectualism. Instead, it's true that you've got certain groups of politically minded individuals who have chosen to use science as simply a hammer, like the word irrational or rational, or like the word subjective, and basically what ought to be a nuanced argument comes down to science is with us, and the other side says, no, science is with us, and then it's like, well, who's science, and why do you have so much faith in these people anyway? But whatever. Now this is interesting. We have poeticized philosophy and metaphysics as we have intellectualized, grounded conceptually and systematically art and love. I don't think that art has been grounded conceptually. I don't think it's been overly intellectualized either. In fact, I think art just keeps getting better. Like, the amount of good music and amazing stuff that people put out that I can listen to now is exponentially greater than it was when I was a kid. If I were making the music I make now when I was a teenager, I would have been successful because it would have been able to compete against that kind of stuff that was being put out then. You know, it was like the more people who are making art, the higher the bar gets, right? You got to be really, really, really outstandingly, spectacularly good in order to be worth anyone's attention. And so there is that quality of it. If you're validating what you're doing by its ability to garner the attention of others, then you are to a certain extent setting yourself up for failure. But, you know, it's like we are open systems. All individuals, including you and me, can understand themselves better and grow and make paradigm shifts so that what used to be a thorny relationship with one's ontology becomes a comfortable one. Here's the second part of this comment. But since poetry is seen as utility and intellectual, we have continued onward to suck all the beauty and meaning from the world, and speak with our ideological peers with the most doldrum stringing of words together that sound overly thoughtful, intellectual dog whistles, when those stringing of words are just brain-dead, dry, artificial phrases. Well, I mean, frankly, I think this is amazingly beautiful. You know, I think your comment's beautiful, even though I disagree with almost everything in it. I think it's beautifully written. I think it's a beautiful expression of the INFJ version of INTJ. Everyone's doing everything wrong, and I'm mad as hell. It's sort of, fateful resignation that the fucked up archetypes of the world just keep on repeating indefinitely forever, To a certain extent they do, but they remake themselves. I don't think that you have a lot more skepticism about well-parsed language than I do. I see plenty of people who are doing intellect theater, and they tend to piss me off. But that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of people out there who aren't doing intellect theater, who are really actually intellectuals. And those individuals are people like me, who are sitting here saying, this is the correct understanding of things, and this is an incorrect understanding, and here's what I don't know, and here's what I do, and here's what we should agree upon if you're a rational person, and here's what we very well may disagree upon and still be rational people, right? It's not the case that rational minds can still disagree. It's the case that in certain instances with certain subjects, rational minds can disagree. There should never be any disagreement between reasoned people about matters of public policy. The only possible disagreement would be you find some sort of axiomatic framing issue that you can neither resolve nor definitively eliminate one of them. I mean, you can either, that would be a form of resolving it. You can either resolve it nor get rid of it from the argumentation. In other words, it's a necessary component or something. The intellectual in his scientism fashions the world into the very thing he condescends, and then pats himself on the back for his lack of insight. Now, I think that's a fantastic sentence, but frankly, I don't think it's really saying anything. I don't know who the people are that you're calling the intellectuals. When I think of intellectuals, I think of a small group of people that is capable of nuanced discourse, basically, and habitually uses it. That's what qualifies them as intellectuals. So I would call, of course, intellectuals aren't necessarily right. I would call David Berlinski an intellectual, and he's almost always right. And yet, I would also call, what's his name? There's this professor of something, and he got kind of famous for objecting to No White People Day or something at his college, but he's pretty, you'd probably call him a lefty. He's very wrong about a lot of stuff, but he's still an intellectual because of the calm and civil fashion in which he's able to engage in the discourse. Not all intellectuals will agree, but real intellectuals are not doing that thing you're saying. They're not trying to fashion the world into empirics and TE and utility. Those aren't intellectuals. Those are NTJs and STJs. ENTJ, ESTJ. That's those types of doing that stuff. INTJ is not even doing that. ISTJ is not even doing that. It's your TE DOMs, probably. Both the TE DOMs are smart enough to wade around in the argumentation pool, and also are blind in one knowledge function, and therefore will always miss the point with half the population in some regard. Leave it to say the layperson might be a lot less problematic, despite their alleged uncaring for abstraction, than the barbarism of today's intellectual who has turned all abstraction into concrete things, who has turned ethics into no more than cold, heartless utility, and acts proud for pointing out the things that everyone can taste and touch as though it is some intellectual height of wisdom. Okay, well, I agree that materialism, or what you might call objectivism, is philosophy for 14-year-olds. I mean, it's something you should outgrow by the time you get out of high school. Because obviously, you can't meaningfully understand human experience by eliminating the parts of human experience that aren't in your wheelhouse, which is what people have done for all of human history. So, like, it's what Karma's Pimp is doing here. This may be true in general for an INFJ or a knower, maybe even an ISFJ. I don't know, but no, this is very NI. But note the frame of things not being worth anything or worth discussing until and unless they are applicable on the broadest pattern level. So I don't think civil society is collapsing. I think society is undergoing serious growing pains, and the most significant of them is population density. So the world in which we developed our values, mores, principles, ethics, etc., was a world that was vastly less populated than today's world. And it turns out that by and large, those principles work even when you scale up. So in other words, principles of self-ownership, autonomy, rights, and a society of peaceful and civil individuals, each pursuing their own interests and goals independently of each other. Those basic principles, that which is not expressly forbidden is permitted, have proved to be remarkably robust in regards to continuing to work even as population ballooned. You would think, well, rights-based frameworks aren't going to work when you have shit tons of people. It's too much pressure for resources. It actually is not true. They probably work better now than they ever have before, in part because so much of the behavior of individuals is done in a metaphysical ecosystem of the internet and not in a physical world where people get into physical conflicts. If you look at the news and the narratives people tell each other about the world, and you derive a lot of conclusions based on patterns from what you're looking at in those articles and stuff, then you will make some availability heuristic errors, if nothing else. So, obviously, if you're like me and you get your news from Google News, a news aggregator, then it's already doing some selection for you. It's like getting rid of some things it doesn't think you want to read. It's putting some things in there you might want to read instead. So there's no such thing as an entirely uncurated feed of news articles because it would be useless. There's a need for curation and a need for personalization. Now, Karma's Pimp is right that the ability to personalize things does tend to mean that people aren't exposed a lot to contrary opinions and ideas, which makes it exactly the same as it's always been. People don't want to hear things that they disagree with, unless they're on the attack, in which case they want to attack the things they disagree with. But usually, even then, it's like if somebody's putting a comment to attack me, like you said here, they are not attacking what I've said at all. They're just attacking me. And so their comments are going to be they're going to be critique theater, some sort of FE critique, or just an appeal to uncertainty in general, with saying, well, we never really know anything. It can be any number of kind of bullshit approaches to that comment as opposed to a serious approach. It is true that I think one thing that's changed that's made the world a somewhat more difficult place to be in is that nowadays everybody can see and does see what it would be to experience life other than they are. So in other words, we watch TV shows, we see rich people doing exciting things, we see blah, 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 blah. When I was a kid, it took me a long time to realize that, oh, I'm not going to get to be all of these things. in succession. I'm not going to get to be a space explorer and a regular explorer and an author and a composer and a conductor. And it's like, and every other thing that I read about that seemed appealing to me. Ooh, I want to be a fashion designer. It wasn't until later on in my adolescence that it really dawned on me, you don't have, you're not ever going to be able to do any of those things. Like, you already missed your boat on it, in some sense. This fact is that we have to sacrifice potentialities in order to embrace potentialities. It's unavoidable. If you make a choice, you are eliminating other possible choices. If you're an INFP or an INTP, that's why you try to avoid making choices entirely. But I would argue the following, or say the following. Number one, I feel you. I think we've all felt this recently, that the world's falling apart. When you have major global action as horrendously irrational and ill-advised as the COVID response, everyone's going to feel a little bit jittery about it, even if they agree to it. I mean, that's the thing. The reason it was so horribly ill-advised is because it was, at its basic core, dishonest. It said, we can massage whatever the story is we want because we know what the good guy's side is. And that's, jumping the gun, right? You're putting the cart before the horse. You have to actually do the thinking first before you know what the right position is. And yet, all these news articles were coming out right away at the beginning saying what the right position was for everybody. Nobody was making the correct argument or providing a reasonable alt, which was, number one, let it run its course. Number two, proportionality. Number three, opportunity cost. Number four, extra legal interdictions. So, I mean, talk about destroying rule of law, etc., etc. So, sure, it can be scary when a lot of shit seems to be pointing to bigger patterns, and it can be depressing too. But here's another example of the problem of over-knowing by knowers. This is true of, I think, some SI DOMs when they try to use NI. It's also true of NI DOMs. I think it was Leaf Trimmer. Leaf Trimmer has determined that there's a big conspiracy to fake reveal to everybody that aliens are around. And I watched a documentary last night about UFOs. And this French guy, who was mostly saying very intelligent things, said something similar to what Leaf Trimmer said. Well, you can see how in the last, number of years, you've had U.S. government official after U.S. government official come out and actually start talking about it when they didn't before. So that's not an indication that the government's planning something, that this is all part of a plan by the government, okay? We have to ask ourselves a question like, what would it look like if it were just an authentic breakdown of secrecy control on the matter, or an authentic relinquishing of secrecy control of the matter? Well, it would look like exactly what it looks like. A sequence of officials on their own time coming out and talking about it. Now, of course, you could argue, well, then if the CIA or somebody wanted to fake such a thing, then that's what they would do. Well, that's true. And that's why we don't use those kind of pieces of evidence, right? It doesn't mean anything. So when this French guy in Leaf Trimmer says, well, all you got to do is look at the news, look at all the news articles about it recently. Surely the government's going to make a big fake alien thing. Or it could just be that the government goes, you know what? We can't figure it out either. So let's stop trying to be all controlly about it. Could just be that. It's like, let's say I've been accused of a crime. I'm totally innocent, but I don't have any alibi. And some circumstantial stuff comes into play that makes me look kind of guilty. Well, my point would be on the witness stand. I know this makes me look guilty, but how would I look different if I were innocent and everything I was saying was exactly true? It would look exactly the same way. So you can't use that to draw any conclusions. That's simple, right? We need to remember that just because just because behaviors of people often are revelatory about larger patterns in some way or another. And just because some of the time, maybe even most of the time, we don't need every single piece of a puzzle to infer the pattern, to intuit the pattern. And if you were an NI front stack person, you do that consciously. So the problem is only certain kinds of things in life are subject to holistic understanding in that fashion. And one thing that's not subject to holistic understanding in that fashion is power dynamics among humans. In other words, because people all behave for different reasons, depending on their personality type, it's not possible to know if it's not possible for there to be like, well, if we do this, then people are going to react to it like this. Very limited scope can we make those kind of predictions because people are an open system and you can't predict how other people are going to contribute to this narrative about a thing that shifts people's perspectives. Now, one of the most effective ways to control how people think, if you were at a government agency trying to do something like that, is not to keep information away from people, but is to pour out shit tons of disinformation. Then people can't figure out what's true and what's not. That was the approach they took at 9/11. So, note here, when I correct people on overreaching NI, I do so because I know what it looks like to have correct NI. And that means it needs to, if you're going to make claims with it, it needs to be supported with strong TI. Or you need to offer some sort of qualifications about the scope of your claim regarding the NI stuff. And you should be aware of the fact that different systems have different maths to them, and that additionally, organisms move between states of equilibrium. All objects and systems do. So the bottom line is, society's not collapsing, but society's conception of itself is. People no longer believe in a group of leaders who know what's going on and are managing things maturely. I don't think really many countries in the world feel that way about their leaders. Maybe a couple of Scandinavian countries or something. We don't feel that way about our leaders because the capacity of individuals to be a statesman, for almost every human being in the world, has not kept up with the heaping amounts of new mapping data that real information fluidity has enabled. So we're post totalizing, but people haven't realized that yet. I have. What I mean by post totalizing is there is no articulable set of words that will comprise for any human being any definitive guidance on positive indications. There is no way to use language or intellectualism to know what you should do. We can only use this to know what we should not do. And if we don't have that meta frame in place to begin with, then we are not qualified to have public power, or public office. So there are very few people qualified to hold public office. I am qualified, but almost nobody is. Now, and this happened over the last 20 or 30 years. Prior to that, people were quite qualified because the times, the reality required less nuanced depth. Now what the world needs is somebody who uses the bully pulpit of the presidency to talk about how to talk. Because the old strategies of adversarial rhetoric that served well enough when you had a population that had gatekeepers on news and that provided very shallow inlets into political discourse. It was easy for most people to ignore it. There used to be a thing called a policy wonk, where they'd have them on TV, on PBS, the McNeil Lehrer Hour or whatever, where the person would come in and actually discuss the details of policies. Well, the problem is here is it includes a means testing element and this blah, 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 and talk about policy shit. All of politics now has been reduced to an ideology test or a team test. Is this what my team thinks? Okay. Or is this what my team thinks? Okay. Now, granted, there are plenty of individuals out there who are not, who declare themselves independents and see themselves as having a mix of perspectives. But by and large, almost everybody I talk to who has an interest in politics has a boogeyman in their head. Some group that they've turned into the boogeyman. Until we can be grown-ups, or until we can exclude the children from political conversation, then we're going to continue experiencing these growing pains. But the solution to it, in other words, how do we shift into the new equilibrium post-adolescence of a mature adult world with mature adult human beings? Well, the answer is it'll happen after I'm president and have the chance to say all the things I need to say. Now, Congressman here would say, but these people aren't going to listen to you. It's an echo chamber. You're never going to reach consensus. The thing is, I don't want to reach consensus. I want people to agree that agreement is at least something that we should attempt before tossing it out the window. I'm not in favor of compromise. I'm in favor of agreement. And I'm not in favor of consensus either. Agreement is something that two people do when they're civilized. If there's something in dispute, they determine which of the two is correct, and they resolve it. Most of the time, in most practical matters, some kind of compromise can be appropriate. But when it comes to policy or public considerations or whatever, compromise is, unfortunately, almost always a Samson's baby thing. And that's the kind of thinking we need to get out of politics. In other words, people who are going into politics thinking they can totalize, well, I'm going to be reasonable and compromise. Or they can totalize, well, I'm going to be unreasonable and stick to my guns. Or they can totalize, well, I'm going to protect rights. Or they can totalize, well, I'm going to put the ends before the means. Or they can totalize any other fucking thing they're thinking. And they haven't developed the metaframe to meaningfully do the intellectual work because the world's outpaced everybody. Not absolutely everybody, though. Don't worry. I'm still here. And I may have had some catching up to do, but I am now, once again, philosophically on top of where humanity is, where it's going, what it needs, etc. Now, you might think, Eric, why would you say such horribly arrogant things that just make people hate you? I don't like knowing that people think I'm an arrogant asshole, but I'd feel much worse knowing I lied. So, that's the answer to the question. No, society's not collapsing. No, social media doesn't tear us apart. Yes, it brings us together by and large. However, if you are a knower, you'll probably be much more brought together by engaging putters of information like me than you would by putting your own, because that makes you too vulnerable. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. And don't forget to like, subscribe, buy my merchandise, send me Christmas presents, write my name on your face, and do a celebratory Hooray Eric jig today while you're at it. Okay? Bye.